This phase of our life together as Christ the King, I'm calling Activate CTK, which is important. For some of us, we may just simply think of it as reopening the church or regathering as the church. But really, throughout this entire pandemic, we have been focused on what it means to be the church in the world, even when our physical doors are shut. And we want to celebrate today how we have remained open as a congregation and how we have continued to be activated and how we will continue to be activated as the church through these next steps. First and foremost, we give thanks to God for a number of things. We give thanks to God for the increased rate of vaccinations that's happened in our communities, and for so many of you who are now partially or fully immunized. If you've received at least one shot, raise your hand and let's look on the screen and see how many folks have. Look at that, tremendous amount of folks that have already received your vaccinations, and that's something that we give thanks to God for today. We give thanks to God for the declined rate of infections, hospitalizations, and deaths, both locally here in Denver and Colorado and across the country. We give thanks to God for the gatherings and time together that families are now very gradually getting to experience. I've heard some stories from some of you that have been able to gather with family that you haven't seen in a long time, and that those are really great stories that we give thanks to God for. We give thanks to God for everyone who continues to follow public health protocols to ensure that we have no further increases in cases and hospitalizations here at the possible end of the pandemic. And so thank you to everyone who continues to follow those protocols even after you've been vaccinated until we know that it's safe to not have those be a part of our life. And then thanks to God for the resilience, grace, and adaptability of all of you, for our whole congregation who for a year have sacrificed in-person worship and gatherings to limit the spread of COVID-19. So just take a moment and lift up your thanks to God for the things that we have learned, for the opportunities that we've had, and for how it is that we've gotten to this point in this pandemic life. As a congregation, we want to lift up and recognize that we recognize this, that public health measures, as recommended by the CDC, still emphasize that any public gatherings utilize social distancing, face masks, and the washing of hands to limit additional risk and spread of the virus among both vaccinated and non-vaccinated populations. We recognize that vaccinated individuals, 2 weeks following the second shot of the Moderna or Pfizer shot or the J&J single shot, that these individuals, some of you, can now gather in small groups with other fully vaccinated individuals without masks, and that is part of the new CDC guidelines that have been distributed. We recognize that in this point in time, our established congregation is a mixture of fully vaccinated, partially vaccinated, and non-vaccinated individuals and families. And so even though there are a number of people on screen that have been fully vaccinated, some of you still only have your first shot, and some of us, myself included, have not had the chance yet to be able to receive vaccinations. And so we are still a mixture of a community in that regard. And that it is important that everyone get vaccinated when eligible to do our part to help end the pandemic and the risks of contracting COVID-19 in our communities. We continue to emphasize that the vaccination process is an important way that our life together can return to be in person in a way that people feel safe and secure being able to do so. So we continue to encourage people to get vaccinated. We recognize that our congregation has changed over the past year, and we want to highlight some of these changes that you likely are aware of, but that we want to emphasize. That over this last year, we have developed an online presence and digital live worship service that will remain necessary for our future as a congregation. Those of you that have windows outside, take a look. How many of you would have been in worship in person today? Not many, I fear. There's a lot of congregations that are not open in person that even have had in-person gatherings during COVID today. And we recognize that there is a lot of benefit to an ongoing online digital worship life for Sundays such as this, and for other times when we have people in our community that cannot worship in person. We also recognize that we've developed an essential partnership with Commune and Project Protect Food Systems, who are still actively using many parts of our building for food distribution and access. We still are having over 300 families a week line up on on Thursdays for food boxes. And we are still having folks come to the church and prepare boxes to distribute to agricultural workers around the state. And that the use of our building right now, we are still going to continue to prioritize to ensure that it can be a benefit for these programs going forward. We recognize that our previous patterns of service and support for worship, such as our musician, Kirk Schott, the Altar Guild, ushers, and other administrative support to prepare for worship have changed, and that we will need to reconfigure and activate new support to make in-person worship possible and sustainable. For us, our worship life, we can't just reopen the doors and do what we did a year ago. We are going to need to change how we gather in person, and we are going to have to reconfigure and make sure that we have enough support to make in-person services possible again in the future. And then we also recognize that there are new elements of worship, including digital content and expanded engagement with our children, that we hope to incorporate into new in-person experiences. And so a lot of the things that we've been able to do online, we want to still be a part of our worship life when we are together in person again. And it's going to take some work to be able to make that happen. So these are our key conclusions at this point in March, is that at this point in time, it is not yet possible for us to set a specific date for when in-person worship will resume on our campus. We are working towards that, but we are not yet able to commit to what that date will be. We commit to regular evaluation and communication with the congregation on a monthly basis starting today until we are able to set a specific date. And so that means that by the middle of April, we do hope to come back to everyone in the congregation, be able to give an update for what we do hope is possible. And so we are not going to wait multiple months or seasons, but that we are talking at least on a monthly basis, if not shorter, in terms of how our updates will start to happen now again. And that we are committed and are fully working towards resuming in-person worship as soon as we feel safe and are prepared to do so. So know that we are not just sitting around waiting for something to happen, but that this phase in our process is a very active phase. And that I want to outline a number of those active processes that we are starting and already have been working on to make in-person worship possible going forward. Our preparation work includes significant building renovations that are going to be happening in March, April, and May. Some of you may know that we have been in an insurance claim over our roof since 2018. Interestingly enough, in December, we finally finished that process. And in January, we received the final significant allotment of funds from Church Mutual. And just this last week, our vision team was able to authorize new work on the sanctuary roof and additional exterior work on our church, including painting and other rehab work that's going to make our church look nice and protect our church for the future. That work is going to begin as soon as the snow is gone this week, and that FHF Construction will be digging in and starting all of that work very soon. That work is going to require a boom lift and multiple safety protocols to be put into place to be able to work on the sanctuary roof. And so our church courtyard is going to be inaccessible during the length of all of those repairs, and that multiple entrances are going to be impacted. And so we do not feel comfortable bringing people back in person until all of those building renovations are done and that the safety features are removed. And so that is a key piece of what's going to be happening in the next month ahead. We are going to be upgrading connectivity in the sanctuary and preparing for live stream capacity in that building. So when we do gather in person, that we can live stream from that space. Our HVAC system in the sanctuary is currently not working, and we've been working on repairs to that system for close to 3 months now, and that we are actively working on those issues. And so until the weather gets warmer, it's also not possible for us to gather in the sanctuary because of the risk of having a cold day. And so like today, if we were gathering in person, it wouldn't have been possible because our fellowship hall is fully in use by the food distribution, and we don't have a heating system that's working properly at the moment. We also will be rehabbing the narthex spaces after wear and tear from the food distribution programs, and we need to be able to prepare hospitable and accessible space while also adjusting to having the food program in our building in some capacity. So we're going to be working on that with our ministry partners to be able to make sure that that's ready to go. And that we also are going to be preparing the courtyard for outdoor gatherings and worship services over the summer months in times where it's safer to be able to still gather outside instead of inside. And so we have a lot of building work that's going to happen over the next 2 to 3 months. In addition to that, over the next 2 months, we're going to be preparing new ways to serve in our worship life, which means that we're going to be working on new musical offerings and the possible hiring of a musician for in-person worship. We're going to be creating new patterns and teams for worship hospitality, including reworking our altar guild and table setters for what it looks like to set up our sacramental life together. We need to reconfigure what ushers and greeters will look like, and we're going to be building teams and asking people to serve in those capacities. And we are still going to have to put into place new cleanliness and safety protocols as we continue to operate by CDC guidelines for in-person worship. We also are going to be preparing for worship each week in different ways. It's going to take time. So our slides and digital content are going to be replacing worship bulletins, and we need to make sure that those are going to be operating seamlessly for how our worship life will operate. There's going to be new roles for our worship assistants and how they serve in worship, and we're going to need new added forms of digital support and leadership for live streaming capacity, and that we're going to be working towards those goals. We also want to make sure that there's faith formation opportunities for children as part of our Sunday mornings. For all of you that have enjoyed the engagement with our children for that first half hour before worship, that has been one of the things that I love getting up every morning to do on Sundays, is to see our kids, to check in with them and to have that time. I want to make sure that our in-person worship life is going to be able to have that same welcoming environment where we can engage and fully work with our kids. And we're going to be working with our young families on how do we do that well and what that will look like in person as well as online. Our preparation work is also going to include listening to all of you. We're going to be having a lot of one-on-one conversations where I can listen to your hopes for our congregational life going forward, about what you've learned over this last year and what you're going to hope that our congregation looks like coming out of the pandemic. Our life groups are going to be hosting conversations about what we've learned during the pandemic and how we can continue to apply those learnings to our future as a congregation. We're going to be identifying and developing new leaders and teams to guide the planning and preparation for specific parts of our in-person worship life. And we're going to be discerning the future ministry possibilities for our congregation beyond in-person worship, especially with our ministry partners, recognizing that these partnerships have become vital ways that we serve in our community and ways that we are learning about the needs of our communities and building relationships. And we want to continue to expand what our future ministries look like through those partnerships. I do want to address relational togetherness, because one of the things that I know that we are all waiting for are those hugs together, right? We cannot wait to be able to be together and to be able to have those connections together. And so one of the additional focuses over the next few months, so March through May, is creating safe and inclusive in-person gatherings to address our need for relational connections, right? So we can acknowledge that our in-person worship life is going to take some time to get ready for, but within CDC guidelines, there are going to be ways that small groups of people, especially fully vaccinated groups of people, are going to be able to safely gather together. And we want to be able to ask, how can we foster those types of in-person gatherings that can nurture our relational lives and our spiritual lives together, and that we can do those as we're getting ready to bring our in-person worship life back online soon. And so those could be life group gatherings in person, they could be outdoors, they could be happening with fully vaccinated people. We want to look at specific ministry gatherings that can begin to meet in person occasionally or regularly. And that includes our Bible studies, our care team meetings, vision team meetings, etc. And that I am going to begin, once I get my vaccinations, to begin to do a lot of in-person one-on-one visits to spend time with you all that I haven't been able to do over this last year for conversations and to be able to connect. And I want to encourage all of you to be thinking about those types of gatherings with the friends and people that you have in your congregations as you feel comfortable and are vaccinated to do so. And I want to remind all of us that this is all redevelopment. We are still a redeveloping congregation. We have been since 2016. We acknowledged that a lot of things would have to change for our congregation to become and remain a vital congregation going forward, and that we are continuing that redevelopment work as we come out of the pandemic, because the pandemic has forced a lot of those changes, but it's moved us forward in a lot of important ways. It's changed our plans, not just for our worship life, but for our building and some of our ministries, but it hasn't changed our vision. Our vision continues to be creating hope and purpose for all people through what we do as a church. And we are going to continue to work on what our plans are to live into that vision in this next phase. We do face significant challenges over this next year from a resource perspective and from just a logistical perspective of living into this next way of life. And it's perhaps going to be a greater challenge than what we faced prior to or during the pandemic. And I want to make sure that we're setting expectations properly, that it's not just going to be, we're all vaccinated, let's celebrate, all's good and well, but we're going to have a lot of challenges as a congregation to work through in this next phase ahead. But we trust that God is with us, that God is leading us into transformational relationships, and that we will faithfully discern the right next steps together as we work through those challenges. And so I ask for your grace and generosity, because it's your grace and generosity that are going to make this all work. So pray for me as your pastor and all of the work that I will continue to put in on your behalf. Pray for our vision team as they work with me and the congregation on these steps. And pray for everyone who's going to be engaging in this work of activating CTK post-pandemic. Please, please, please share your honest feelings. And I don't want you to have to hide how you're feeling or to repress any of those feelings because of the challenges we face. But share your honest feelings while recognizing the difficult tasks and decisions that we face in these steps. Please be gracious with one another as you share in renewed relationships. And as we encounter the changes that all of us have had over this last year. Please continue to be financially generous with our congregation for the sake of our ongoing witness and mission in the world, as so many of you have been. And finally, I want to acknowledge this, that it may feel like we do not have enough. There will be moments where we will feel like we do not have enough to make this work. But with God, we recognize we are abundantly blessed with the resources we need to become the church that God needs us to be going forward. And that we will have the resources that we need to change and to transform into the congregation that God needs us to be. It may not be the congregation we were, it may not be the congregation we necessarily dream of right away, but as long as we trust that the resources we have will be enough, we will continue to be faithful in our mission as the church. So that's a lot of information and a lot of uncertainty still ahead, but we wanted to make sure to communicate with you all about the active steps that we are taking. And we do hope that hopefully in a month from now, if whatever that time frame may be, that we will be able to finally put a date on the calendar and that we will be able to look towards that time where we will be together in person for worship again. So with that, I want to open up the floor for any questions or comments that you all have and any reflections you may have on our next steps together as a congregation. I'd love to be able to hear from you, regardless of what the questions or reflections may be.